Well, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Joni Parsons. I'm co-creator of Rebel 11. We started Rebel 11 about 4 years ago to inspire women with inspirational, informational, edgy, and fun events. Like, we're going to have a very fun event this morning. We also hold retreats regionally here in the Seattle Pacific Northwest area, nationally and around the globe. So you can check us out on rebel11.com. Thank you again for joining us. Today, I'm so excited to be talking about something that I'm incredibly passionate about, which is flowers and container gardening. And there's nothing more delightful than picking out the perfect plant for the perfect pot. And, you know, it just brings so much joy when you have that perfect container either on your deck or, you know, on your apartment deck or your home deck. And it just makes such a difference, and it just makes me smile every single time. So what is it that you do with those yellow flowers to make them pop? What do you do with annuals and perennials? Well, guess what? We're going to learn all about that today with Ravenna Gardens, and it's one of my favorite gardening stores in Seattle and one of the best ones, I have to say. Joe Matthews started it years ago, and I was very fortunate to meet her when I was doing the public relations for the Northwest Flower and Garden Show. But today we have Barbara Libner, who has been with Ravenna Gardens for over 20 years and doing their merchandising, and guess what? They're container gardening. So Barbara, welcome. It's so nice to see you this morning.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here with you all this morning. I appreciate the invitation to talk about something that I could really literally spend all day talking about, my favorite subject.
You and me both. There's nothing better than going over to Ravenna Gardens and seeing all the beautiful creations that you have done over the years and this year as well. Are you guys busy this year after such a crazy last year?
Are we busy? Oh, yes, we are very, very busy. People are really starting to garden in I think, unprecedented numbers. And it's been a great thing during lockdown and quarantine for people to get out in their own gardens. And I think it's made us realize kind of what the shortcomings of our own gardens are in terms of wanting to spend time out there. And so, yeah, we have seen a lot of heightened interest in plants, vegetables, containers, anything plant related. It's been a really fun season, and everybody's so enthusiastic about it.
Well, everybody's so joyful, you know, first of all, that things are starting to open up a little bit, you know, here and around the world. And, you know, there's so much joy when you walk into a garden store, when you see all of the array of flowers and textures, and now, you know, all of the, like you said, all the vegetables are coming out. And it is this array of hope and joy and new beginnings that, you know, people like you at Ravenna Gardens and others create so that we can make our homes a better place. And I was lucky enough to go there last week, and Barbara helped me pick out this whole container, which I'm going to plant later today. And we're going to start, Barbara and I actually filmed this a week ago, and we needed to do that because Ravenna Gardens opens at 9 o'clock. So the video runs 37 minutes, and we will be back for question and answer. So write down your questions, and you should all have the plant list already. But we will come back for questions and answers in 37 minutes. And we're going to run the video. It might be a little clunky here because we're doing multiple things. We've had a little technical issue this morning, but let's go ahead and get started and enjoy everything that Barbara has to offer and the tips she has to offer. There's so many of them. I learned so much last week and so excited to create my pots. So Natalia, who is helping us today, is going to go ahead and play that video.
I'm just thrilled to be joining you today to talk about what is my passion, which is how to create beautiful outdoor containers that last from season to season. Let me introduce myself a little bit. My name is Barbara Libner. I work at Ravenna Gardens, which is an urban garden store in Seattle's University District. And I am the lead container designer and lead merchandiser here and have been for the last 2 decades. I also periodically write articles on container design for Fine Gardening magazine. So I've had quite a bit of time to develop a good strategy for designing containers that really work and that really last, and have given me some good useful tips that I'm going to pass on to you today about how we can capture the essence of this season, but also create a foundation that we can build on in seasons to come. So I love the idea, I'm going to interrupt myself, but I love the idea that you can create a structure one time for your pots, and then just swap out annuals seasonally, and it saves you a lot of time and money, and your pots look better and perform better for a longer period of time. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to talk a little bit about my approach to designing containers, and then I'm going to actually put it all together, and we're going to plant this pot right here together so that you can see how that all comes together in practice. Okay, so let's dive in. The main approach that, the main ideas that I want to get across in my approach to container design start with kind of how you layer your plants. And what I find is that most people's pots are in a place where you just see them from maybe 3 sides, but rarely see the back of the container. For example, you might have them at your front door, they're at the edge of the patio or the edge of the balcony, and you really rarely see the back side of a pot. And so that's what we're going to focus on today, is looking at how to design for those kinds of conditions. The thing I like about that is that instead of having one upright plant in the center of your container surrounded by annuals, which is great if people are going to be walking around it all the time, but since it's not usually how we use our spaces, what I like about this approach is that you're able to really, each plant really stands out on its own and is also contributing to the whole design in such a way that this plant next to this plant makes everything look a little bit better. And that's what's so fun about combining plants, is finding those things that when you hold up the first plant, the second one makes it look even better. And so we'll see that as we plant this container up. I want foliage to be those good bones of the pot. I feel like flowering plants are kind of the jewelry on what is already a stellar outfit. So if you start with the good bones, then you can add those little bits of color later on. But if you don't have the good bones, those bits of color don't really hold up on their own. So I also want a container that is a full and mature looking the moment it's planted. I'm surrounded by some containers here that I planted maybe 1 or 2 weeks ago, and they look like they've been put together for quite some time. So there's not bare spots. I don't want to see bare dirt. The plants are kind of mingling. So when we plant this one, we'll see how to do that. But I feel like the garden takes forever to grow in. You know, you put your plants in the garden, and it just is very time consuming to watch them grow to maturity and for those combinations to really be apparent. And container gardening is just instant gratification. And I do love that about it as well. You can really play around with the containers. And then the last thing I'm going to say before we dive in and start planting is that we're really working with color here. That's the main thing that we all see when we're looking at containers. And color is a very personal preference. And so I tend not to pay much attention to design trends. We're all influenced by fashion, and our taste may change over time, but I don't set out to follow any particular trend. What I would encourage you all to do is to choose the colors that just thrill you. You're living with these containers day in and day out, and they should just bring you so much joy. And if you're working with a color combination that's trending, but it's not really your combination, it just doesn't help you in the long run. So choosing our plants is the first thing, which is fun because this is the part where you get to go to the nursery and buy plants. Number one tip is that you want to take a really hard, honest look at whether you have sun or shade, and you might have a little bit of each, but wishful thinking in that department is never successful. If you have a very shady area that gets no direct sun, choosing a geranium or something that's a real sun lover is never going to perform for you in those conditions the way that it looked when you brought it home. So it really pays to be honest and and buy with an eye toward what your conditions are. All the containers that are surrounded here and the one we're going to plant today are for full or maybe part sun, but preferably full sun. Right now, too, the sun is moving north, and in Seattle, in my garden, for example, the pots that in the wintertime are completely shaded by the house. They get no direct sun, but in the summertime, as that sun moves north, my pots get full afternoon sun. So that's something to take into consideration. Also, that you may be moving pots from one area to another closer to your living area. So you just really want to pay attention to that. So we're going to talk about a little bit about relying on that evergreen foliage color as I put this combination together. If you take away nothing else from this, the key for lasting containers is relying on that evergreen foliage color. It doesn't even have to be showy color. For example, this is a euonymus green spire. It's plain green. It doesn't really do anything, but it makes everything that you put in front of it look so much better. This is one of the bloomers we're going to plant today, which by itself, it's a nice plant. It looks good. It's pretty. But when you put it in front of something that's that dark, dark green, the color really pops. And so this is what those evergreen plants can do for you, is that makes everything else just look that much better. The key to those evergreens is that they are different from one another, that each one is distinct, but they don't have to be each one flashy or each one the star. They're there to back up these guys that are the star. So I'm going to start with a good frost-proof container. So this can be outdoors all year. It has a hole in the bottom, which is crucial. You need to have drainage for good success. I've filled it about this far up already with a good quality potting soil. And I'm using Cedar Grove potting soil, which comes from our garden waste that they come and pick up from the city. And it's really nice because that's a closed loop system where you take your yard waste, you give it to the city, and then they create this beautiful potting soil that we can use. And it's really, it works really well for me. I really like it a lot. So if you have access to that, that's great. If you don't, any good quality potting soil that's going to be a good balance of moisture retentive and dries nicely is a good choice. So we're going to start here with our evergreen foliage color. As I say, this is a euonymus. Its ultimate shape is just going to be to continue to grow up and just a little bit wider, but it's always going to be a vertical. And that's always a nice way to start when you want to anchor your containers. The reason I filled up to here is because that's about the depth of this pot. So I'm ready to just kind of set this plant in here when I take it out of the pot. So, which I'm going to do now. All right. Please do note that most plants do have a front and a back because they've been growing in their pots in a particular direction. So I usually try to find which side that is and make sure that that's facing forward. And you can't believe what a difference that makes in just making your container look good. So I am going to put the plant so that the top of the soil is just slightly below the rim of the pot. And they're all every plant's going to be like that. And we're just going to keep filling in with soil. So there's my evergreen. I recommend that if you have difficulties with your colors being all over the place, that you limit yourself to a really restricted palette. My personal mantra is 2 colors plus green. And I feel so strongly about it that I wrote an article for Fine Gardening on it. That really helps you focus on the texture and the shape of other plants. And so you pick that one annual that you just love, whose color is the thing that you really want to go for. In this case, for me, it's going to be this coleus, which is an annual. And, key your other colors around that. It's also good to pick up the color of your container. So if you're working with blue pots, to add a little punch of blue, a neutral pot like this, you can go any direction you want to. But that really helps, that 2 colors plus green. It may be like the pots that we're doing here, or the ones on this side, that it's just strictly a palette of kind of pinks, but each one's a little bit different, some deeper, some lighter. Or with the blue and yellow pots over here, there's clearly blue and yellow, white and yellow kind of freebies. That's kind of green, kind of shades of green. But it really helps you focus on the whole thing. There are lots of folks who just love lots and lots of color. It's hard to be successful with that in one small pot. over a series of pots together, it's a little bit easier, but it's nice to be able to repeat your color, and that's just difficult to do in a single pot. The other, I have a kind of a template for when I put these pots together. And the template is just a place to start. It's kind of a blueprint to get you going where you want to go. But I would say if you start your selection with 2 evergreen plants, so for this, it's going to be this one. And we're going to do this grass, which is a Carex Evercolor Everrio. It's got a long name. But these are both evergreen plants. Neither one of them by itself is doing a whole lot of flashy things, but together, that's a lot of foliage color and a lot of power all year round, regardless of what annuals you put in there. So they're different in height, they're different in shape, they're different in color, but again, it's still kind of a neutral background for what's gonna come next. So two evergreens, then I would choose 2 annuals, and in this case, we're going to do the coleus because the coleus has amazing color every single day until the first big freeze. It's pure color. It does bloom, but this is what you're excited about is the foliage color, and then a bloomer. So it could be 2 different bloomers. It's nice if they have a little bit of a different shape, a little bit of a different, not exactly the same matching color, but in this case, we're going to do these 2. So we've got our 2 evergreens, our 2 annuals, a trailer. In this case, this is Lysimachia aria, which is golden creeping Jenny, and it is just like a little drop of sunshine. And this one actually comes back year after year, although it's not apparent in the wintertime. And you may want to repeat that and do it more than once so that you have it coming off of both edges of your pot, but we're counting that as one thing. So that's really the fabulous 5 plants: 2 evergreen foliage color, 2 annuals, and a trailer. And then there's going to be bonus points later for a little bit more. But if you get that, then you're really on your way to making something that's going to work. In a larger container, I would just select larger plants. I wouldn't necessarily have a lot more plants. You can maybe repeat some things, but you're just going to scale everything up or down for a smaller pot. So I'm going to add this guy in, and the key here, when I tap them out of this pot, is to really get them to snuggle together. I'm going to do this slightly off, this guy's slightly off center. And I'm going to break up the root ball just a little bit so that it knows it doesn't have to keep going in circles. And then I'm going to push it right next to this guy. I'm not being cruel, and not squishing all the air right out of them, but I'm trying to get them so that they're really close and that the foliage is going to kind of mingle together a little bit. All right, so I'm going to do my annuals, and my soil level is a little bit low, so I'm going to have to add a little bit of soil. And how am I going to do that? I'm on a lazy Susan, so I'll do it like that. Okay, just going to add a little bit of soil right out of my bag so that I have the right height platform to work on here for my smaller plants. Come back around to you. All right, so I'm going to do my coleus, and this coleus, they're coleus for sun and shade and everything in between, and my favorite ones are the ones that say sun or shade. And then you can do anything you want with them. There just isn't another plant, a type of plant that has this kind of color. So I'm going to go down to about here now and set this in next to this guy so that the top of the soil is just below the rim, and that starts to give me some real punch. Next, we're going to put in, always use your good expensive tools like your gloves and your hands. I'm a very limited tool user. All right, so now my soil is almost up to here so that I can add in some more things. So my second annual is going to go in. And what I want to note here is that I've chosen not just the evergreen versus annual, but I've chosen different shapes, different heights, and different heights and different colors. So I've got an upright, I've got something that kind of mounds this way. This one's a little more upright, kind of echoes this. And now I have kind of a little roundy moundy that's going to go right here toward the front where I can really see the blooms. This is a dianthus, which has a kind of a lovely smell. It's like small carnation. I'm going to just barely gently break up the root ball, just enough. And then I'm going to snuggle it right in there. Okay, I have to spin for a second so I can make sure I got it in the right place. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to fill any spots that are obvious gaps. So I'm going to try and get these things to just kind of fill in right there in the center. I might move some foliage over a little bit. This is an artificial construct, so you can do that. So then I'm going to put in my trailers. And the reason that I chose these trailers, it's nice to have that contrast with the upright and the mounding things and then something that goes down the side of the pot. The reason that I chose this particular one and not a million of the other things that are out there and available is because it repeats the color of this grass. And so as this is going to grow down on this side, it repeats that yellow. So sometimes in the larger pot, you might have room for one on each side. Ooh, a lot of soil. But we're going to go right in here. And again, the key is to get them to really look like they've been in there a while. So I'm going to put the longest pieces draping down the front, but I also kind of want them to mix and mingle a little bit with this guy right here. And I think I do have room in this pot for another one, so I'm going to put it in. It's nice to have a little bit of symmetry since most of this is asymmetrical. So I'm just going to make a little bit of a hole. It's amazing how many plants you can fit in when you're looking at them in their pots. They seem like they're not going to fit, but when you get them out and in the soil, and the soil kind of moves around and you can squish them together, you can get a lot more plants in than you think. All right, so there you've got your 2 evergreens, your 2 annuals, your 1 kind of trailer, and then as I said, there would be bonus points. And for me, no pot is quite complete without a little bit of ground cover at the front. And it's what I would call the sweet spot. I don't want to see this bare dirt right here. And eventually the annuals will help fill in and cover it. But initially, it's nice to have a little something that covers the dirt there. And the other thing that this is going to accomplish, this is Irish moss, which is just plain green again. But it's going to repeat the plain green here. And it also helps to separate the color from the pot so that everything, again, looks really nice and distinct. So I'm going to take that out. Give it a little swish there. And try not to destroy my blooms. I'm going to put it right in the front. And you can see how that sets off this bloom now, just immediately. The last thing I'm going to do when I'm planting is I'm going to go back and I'm going to fill in all these little gaps that I have in the soil and make sure that everything is filled in. So I just used my very expensive little pot that I just took plants out of. And I just gently fill in and tamp them down so that everybody is nicely tucked in. Do the same thing here. And I'm also going to fill in, I'm a messy planter, but I clean up good, so that's okay. I'm also going to fill in the entire back. So right now I have the back of the container that doesn't have soil here. So I'm going to add soil to the back so that everything, again, is up to that level. I'm trying not to bury any of the stems. I don't want the soil to be coming up over the plants. I want that top level of the soil and the plants to just be right there, even with the rest of the soil that I put in. Okay, so if I had a bigger pot, I might be able to fit in, that's possible, I can even do it in this one. I could maybe fit in another annual, another bloomer. If I'm going to do that, I want to make sure that, again, the shape and the bloom color contrast with what's going on. I don't want to have another little round button-like flower. So there are lots of choices out there, but a geranium in the back could be really lovely. It's almost the same color, but it is a little bit of a different shape. And if we add that in right here, that really gives this little section here that without it is not all that exciting. It gives it a little bit of punch. You might have room for a trailer in the front So a petunia or something like that, that kind of mounds is great in a larger pot. But I do actually have room here. Let me show you. I have this little space right here that is plenty big. It's only about from here to here, but it's plenty big to be able to get that last plant in. And I know that this, as it grows, these are going to kind of grow in tandem. So as this gets bigger, this is going to get bigger, but this is never going to be a huge height. So I have some height to work with in putting in the geranium. So I'm going to do that. This one is a zonal geranium, cherry rose. And all I'm doing right now is I'm just taking a little bit of the soil off here. Move this over so you can see. So I'm just taking a little bit of the soil off because this was in a kind of a huge pot. I'm not really breaking off roots. I'm just shaking off a little bit of soil. So this is why you can snuggle things closer together, because a lot of that soil could come right off and you have more soil right here. So I'm making sure that my hole is the right size. And again, I'm paying attention to the front and the back. This is clearly the front of the plant. It's been sitting in a flat where that's the back. So I'm going to try and orient the front forward. And I'm just going to tuck it right in here. And that all of a sudden elevates the whole thing, doesn't it? It really, now that I have this lovely triangular shape, I have now repeated my colors, repeated my yellows, I've repeated my pinks, and I've repeated the green, but I haven't really gone wild and I don't have too much else going on. I don't think I said this yet, but I don't generally put perennials in my pots. And the reason for that is because annuals bloom pretty much every day, all summer long. And winter pansies will go a whole lot of the winter. So I would rather have that reliable color than what you get from the perennials. I'm thinking of things like coneflowers that have an amazing flower, but right now are a tiny little plant, and it's going to take them a couple months to get up to the blooming stage, and their foliage isn't that interesting. And then they leave a gap when they're done. So, and they maybe bloom for a month as opposed to several months like the annuals do. So my thinking is that the perennials go in the garden. And you can hide their foliage. It doesn't really matter as much if the foliage isn't that great, because you're getting these beautiful blooms that come up behind other things. But these are front and center. These are right under your nose on the patio. And so I don't want to be looking down at foliage that's not pulling its full weight in a container. And so if it doesn't have just perfect foliage pretty much every day, then it goes in the garden and it doesn't go in the pot. So nothing wrong with those plants. It's just the right plant, right place. So let me get some of my dirt off of here. Okay, the only other thing that I really need to do with this pot, I'm going to finish filling in the soil in the back. It's not quite finished, but you don't need to watch me do that part. All I'm going to do is put this where it's going to go. It's good to put it up on pot feet, just anything that raises it up from your patio or your deck, just a little bit so that the water can really freely drain through. And as soon as you're finished planting, you want to give it a good watering. All that, even if your plants are already moist, all that soil I just put in needs to be saturated, or it's just going to pull all the water right out of the root balls. So give it a good watering. And then during the season, you're just going to water when the top of the soil looks dry to the touch. And how often that is going to change depending upon the weather. If your weather is cool and the sun's not really out, you could get by with a lot less watering. When it's really hot out, you might have to water every few days. But the nice thing about having a stoneware container is that it doesn't suck any moisture out of your container, out of your plants. And so you can get by with a little bit less watering. So fertilizing, you really only want to fertilize so that your annuals stay in bloom. I don't want to over fertilize this because I'm not looking for these other things to grow like crazy. They don't need a whole lot of food. So oftentimes there's already fertilizer in the annuals. When you purchase them, you'll see little granular nuggets in the bottom. And so you just don't have to worry about doing too much fertilizing. There's quite a lot already in there. If you give them a mild dose, maybe once a month during the summertime, that should be enough to keep them going. Then the only other thing that you have to do is deadhead, which is just picking off any spent flowers. So we're going to take a look at these containers that I just planted 1 or 2 weeks ago, and they're nice and full, but they did follow those same design principles that we were just talking about. So I've got my 2 main plants here. This is the hebe, and this one's a phormium. They're a little tender in some climates. In Seattle, they often will live over, but this is going to be my evergreen backbone for this pot. Same thing here. I've repeated this, and I've added an evergreen grass down here, which is a carex, and those give me that that evergreen structure. I have that same dianthus in here and a coleus, and here I have the dianthus and a petunia. And the nice thing about doing 2 containers is that you can, I would put even a third one here, and it makes an instant garden. So if you're living someplace that doesn't have a big garden, or doesn't have a lot of color, or you really want to just focus in on your outdoor living space, it's nice to do a whole trio of containers that repeat some of the plants. And so that's what I've done here. So I've got my two evergreens, my 2 annuals, my trailers. In this case, it's Heliochrysum right here and here. And then that same little Irish moss. What the Irish moss will end up doing is it'll just kind of make this little delicate curtain right over the front of the pot. So even at the time when these other things are sort of growing and filling in and obscuring it a little bit, it'll just keep growing down. It doesn't really trail, but it makes this kind of nice soft edge, which I love. And I've keyed the plants. I've repeated the white of the pot here in some of the plants, which really helps also tie it all together. So those definitely follow the same ideas that we were looking at here. And so I'm going to take a look at this pot, which is the same, again, the same idea, but it's a completely different color combination. We've started with a really good frost-proof pot, which is a great cobalt blue. We've picked up that pot color in our flowers, so I've repeated the blue. It's not exactly the same blue, but which is kind of nice. Actually, it gives you a little bit of variety. I've got my evergreen foliage color. This is the Choicea, which is a Mexican orange. Great yellow foliage color, mixed with something similar to the one that we looked at, that we just planted. This is a smaller version of the euonymus, so this one stays nice and short. So again, there's always going to be that kind of difference in height and form between these two, plus the difference in color. I've got this nice plain green carex over here. So those things, if you don't look at any of this, and you just look at the 3 things in the back, they already have, it's already interesting. And then you add your bloomers. And here, again, I'm sticking to a limited color palette of blue and yellow. And I've got just the 2 annuals, and then my little sweet spot, instead of being the Irish moss, here is Alyssum, which is kind of adds a nice little bit of a sparkle and is a bloomer for the summer. And then my trailers. So it doesn't matter which color scheme you're going with, these ideas still apply. And you'll find that even at times, if the pansies are taking a break, or you have nothing but buds here on the center osteo, which is a osteospermum, African daisy, couldn't think of it. If they're taking a break and there's not a lot of blooms, you still have a beautiful container. In the wintertime, all I would do is I might replace the same pansies with winter pansies, which just means they are planted at a different time, so they'll go all winter long. And maybe this becomes a cyclamen, and this whole container is ready with just a couple of annuals swapped out for the second half of the year, or at least the winter part of the year. So that's really all you need to do. Okay, so I would say that the big takeaways is that these containers really only need to please you. You're the one living with them. They should make you happy every day. So, but you can also afford to be bold with your color. If you want to try something that's new and it's different, it's hard to do in the garden, containers are a perfect place to kind of express your creativity and try some new combinations. You might find something that you love and you decide that you want to replicate in your garden. You might find that, well, I liked it, but it's not something that I want to do for a whole color scheme. Then you know, and it's easy to do in a small space. It's much easier to replant a container than to replant your whole garden. So it does make a fun way to try out some new and bold combinations. And also, because you are going to be changing them from time to time, you can afford to take some risks and do something that is unusual for you. Anything that you want to try is so fun to put all these different plants together, especially when you have that good structural foundation that you know that's going to carry you through, regardless of what your color choices end up being. Okay, so we're going to take a look at a final combination that doesn't rely on blooms at all. but still kind of hits all those other points that we've been talking about. And we're going to start with this cryptomeria, which is called, it'll come to me in a minute. It's a beautiful plant. Black dragon, that's it, cryptomeria black dragon. It's gorgeous, gorgeous foliage, really interesting shape as it grows. And again, it's a good plain green background to start with. Then I'm going to add black mondo grass to this one. Black mondo grass is just gorgeous. It's got that nice, shiny, truly black foliage. It's not dark blue. It's not gray. It's really good black foliage. And those two, again, together, that already makes something kind of interesting. But then I'm going to add this maidenhair fern. This combo can be for part sun or part shade. But this is an evergreen maidenhair fern, Himalayan maidenhair, and the texture is so amazing. So I've got my upright form, kind of fountainy form, and then my little moundy guy. I've got, even though there's no bloom color in here yet, I've got multiple shades of green, from light green to dark green to black, and I've got different textures as well. So I've got this nice delicate texture against this kind of strappy boulder foliage. Then we're going to add a coleus, and this one is called Telltale Heart, and it's just amazing because this one, let's get over here so you can see it. It's black and green, basically. It's a little bit more of a red black, but it's just gorgeous. And so that is going to go right in the middle where I would normally have put a bloomer. We're going to set these down a little bit lower here, but you get the general idea. So I'm going to choose trailers that can take either sun or part shade. And in this case, I have bacopa, but it's a golden bacopa. So it still gets little white flowers, but it's got a nice shiny, I do love some shiny gold foliage, especially when it's trailing down the side of a pot. And if you want to guess what color pot I would put this combination in, it would be black, because it will pick up, this will kind of repeat that black color. But a black foliage on a black pot is not going to be too interesting. So if I snuggle these guys right underneath the black, it separates this from the pot and gives you that little bit of sunshine right there at the bottom. So I probably would do 2 trailers. I don't always do 2. Sometimes I just do 1. It depends upon how your combination's coming out and what you want to achieve with it. And then for my sweet spot on this one, this is a Juga Black Scallop. One of my favorite plants. It's just absolutely beautiful color. It's ever so slightly different than this, but look at the texture is completely different. So even when you put 2 black plants together, they're very distinct from one another. There's still plenty of contrast, even though there's not contrast in color. So this one I'm going to put right in the front. So when I get those all snuggled in together, hopefully you can see that pretty well. I don't have except for the tiny little blossoms on the bacopa, I don't have a bloomer in the bunch. And it's still really interesting color combination, and really great for part sun, part shade. This little fern can take a little bit of sun. So there are ways to do this. If you're not a big bloom person, there's lots of ways to put together really interesting foliage and still have a really gorgeous combination. I'm going to give you one last one to go on, and then hopefully you'll make your way to the local nursery and pick out some things and give this a try on your own. So the last combination we're going to do, I'm not going to plant it, but I'm just going to show you like I did with the last one. Starts with this cypress, which is a Wilma Goldcrest. Beautiful lime foliage. I love to use these in pots. It's a great pot plant. And in this one, we're going to go purple. So I've got heliotrope, and this one is nice and tall, but this is what it's going to look like when it blooms. So I've got tags. I've got a beautiful purple to contrast against that. My second evergreen is going to be a heuchera. Heucheras are really indispensable plants for containers. They come in orange, red, purple, yellow, lots and lots of different colors, and they're mostly evergreen, but they really play a key role, especially in a bigger pot. So I'm going to add that one here. And again, different, similar color, but very different foliage shapes. For my second annual, it's my new favorite petunia. It's just gorgeous. It's got a lime rim around the purple, and this one is called Moonlight Eclipse. And if I have a larger pot, I can afford to put in possibly 2 of these instead of just 1. So I would snuggle that guy in the middle. And that lime edge picks up the lime here. So again, we're repeating some colors. And for my trailers on this one, I would use this limelight licorice plant, which is a heliochrysum. And this is the most amazing color. It's really, it's not shiny, it's really dull, but especially when you put it with, when I talk about color pairings, this is it right there. That completely picks up that color of that edge. And it's, again, coordinates with this, but slightly different. Run out of table. So I'm going to add those in. And the nice thing about the heliochrysum is it kind of weaves in through your planting. So it'll kind of just come up underneath things and kind of move all around your planting. Another personal favorite is silver posy thyme. This is actually a culinary thyme, but the foliage is so beautiful on this. And if I had to pick a favorite plant, this was definitely in my top 5. And this added right to the front there gives you just that little bit of sparkle that otherwise the purple is a little dull. And this just gives a little sparkle on top of that. And then again, I would add my my moss, but this time instead of using the Irish moss, which was the green one, dark green one here, this is Scotch moss, which is that limey color that echoes this. So we put that right in the front, and we have another glorious combination, really easy, still follows all of our principles, and is going to just go like crazy all summer long. And again, we've got evergreen, and actually the thyme is evergreen, and so is the little guy in the front. So we've got really good bones that we can work with in the fall and in the winter. Okay, so I just encourage you all to have a good time, go to your nursery, keep an eye on yourself in regards to your sun and shade requirements, and not going too crazy with color, but being able to pick up on all those little subtleties, and make sure that you include those evergreens in with your annuals, and you will have an absolutely beautiful container design that's going to last all summer long and then into subsequent seasons. Thank you very much.
And I'm just going to do this in the order that you asked them. The first one is what needs replacing in that demo pot for the summer. The question was just mostly about the dianthus and whether that will keep going. It goes for a really long time if you keep deadheading, which is cutting off the spent flowers. But if it's something that's not continuing to perform, then that's the only thing in that pot that you'd really have to take out for the summer. And you could replace it with something like a petunia, or I could have put in a petunia to start with, but I was kind of in love with the dianthus at that moment, so I didn't. But you can put in, I think, just that one plant. In the wintertime, I would swap out that petunia or your dianthus or whatever it is. Maybe I would put winter pansies in. There's not a lot of things that will keep that color going over the winter besides the pansies. And then cyclamen, which is not really hardy. Yeah, they're beautiful plants, but and it's a lot of bang for your buck for the cyclamen, but when you have a good hard freeze, they are iffy. So that's all
Barbara,
you need to do.
I have a question about that. When do you normally plant cyclamen? Would that be like in November timeframe?
We usually get them in even in October, sometimes a little bit earlier than that. They like cool weather, so as long as the weather is getting much cooler, heat signals them to go dormant. So as long as the weather's cooling, that's when they come in and you can plant them. I always recommend that people just plant them right in their pots, in that hole that was left by your dianthus or your petunia. Just stick the whole pot right in there. And you just have to remember to water the cyclamen in the pot. But that way, if a hard freeze is predicted, you can just go and pop that whole pot out, stick it in the garage somewhere that's bright but not freezing. And when that cold snap is over, stick it back in. It seems like work, but they're not cheap, but they are absolutely spectacular. Probably the showiest thing that you can put in your containers for winter. So
that's such a great tip. That's a great tip, just to place it right in there.
It also shows you how that container combination lasts for such a long time without you having to really do too much to it. You're just swapping out a plant here or a plant there. Also in the wintertime, I'm a big fan of putting twigs in there. So like when the coleus or the geranium are gone, I might pull those out because they're not gonna come back next year. And I'll put in like red twig dogwood, just kind of poke the cut stems right in the soil. If you do use perennials in your pots, which I rarely do, you can put them around the crown of the perennial, not right into it, but it kind of hides where it was for the winter, and then it'll come back the next year. So that was a longer answer than you asked for, but that is what we're placing in that pot. Someone asked about the proportions and if there's a rule of thumb for the proportions, and I usually plant, if my pot is this big, I usually plant this much stuff on top of it. So you can see in that demo one, it was about the same height as the pot, the plants. It's just a rule of thumb. You can go a little bit taller. If you don't have, like if I'm doing 3 pots together, I'll break that rule on maybe one of the lower pots and do a lower planting. So it's kind of, I kind of eyeball it, but generally speaking, you can just do double the height of the pot. And for width, anything goes, as long as it's not going to snag people on the way to the front door. You can get as much width in there as possible. I really like when I first plant to have things that spill over the sides as much as I can have.
Yeah, and these plants that we talked about the other day, I mean, they're going to go down the side, like you said, and just be so beautiful. But there's some going over already when you first put it in.
Yeah, and the nice thing about that particular plant, which is Immortale or Heliochrysum limelight, for anybody who's taking notes, it not only kind of trails down, it's a little bit stiff, so it will also just kind of go oddly through your whole pot, which I really like, because then all of a sudden you get that sparkly, well, not sparkly, but that felty, almost like lamb's ear.
It is really felty.
Yeah, and it'll end up all the way through. So like with that cryptomeria, it would just kind of weave itself through, going up and down. This is a great plant. And someone asked how many plants per pot. I would say that if you start with the basic, the fabulous 5, the evergreens and the annuals and the trailers, then you can kind of see how much else you can put in, but it totally depends upon the size of your pot and the size of the plants that you're putting in. If you're just putting in 4 inches, you can fit a lot more than you can if you're putting in gallon plants. So I would say you don't really need more than 5 or 6 plants. I think it takes away from the overall impression if you're adding lots and lots and lots of different things. So it's not really, that's not really an answer, but there is not a rule of thumb.
That is a great tip, to remember the fabulous 5 and then go from there. I mean, that's something that I've always tended to pull more plants and different styles of plants than you did. And so I think that's just a fabulous tip.
Yeah, and you can always just repeat them. So if you have if you have like a dianthus on a petunia on the one side, you can always repeat it on the other side, like we did with the pot that had the Wilma Goldcrest cypress in it. And that instantly adds more bulk to your pot, but it's the same plant, and isn't that beautiful? So that one is a favorite plant of mine. It is Petunia Moonlight something. Moonlight. It will
be eclipse on your list that I'm sending out immediately following this.
Every plant that I showed you will be on that list, but this is Petunia Moonlight Eclipse, and it's just so beautiful. So if you double those up, that kind of helps you fill in some gaps if you have some extra space in your pot. Somebody asked about plants that don't work well together, and I think there's a lot of them, but I don't know what they are. So I would suggest when you're at the nursery that you get your box going, you get your main things in there, and then you just start holding things up and seeing whether they look distinct enough from the other plants and whether they are too distracting. I just think that when you put something up that really works, it kind of just sings, and that would be my way to do it, is just to walk around with your box or your cart at the nursery and evaluate some things, stick some stuff on the bottom shelf of the cart if you're not sure, and then just play a little bit with it. That's the place where you can edit things out before you take them home. And ask the nursery people for help. If you're not quite there, show them what you have so far and say, this isn't really working for me. What can I do differently? And we all have lots of opinions about things like that. So, and
Barbara, doesn't it help at the nursery to, even just put together selection like this just to see if it looks good and if it, you know, really appeals to your eye, and then ask for help as well. But just
Absolutely.
setting things together like this just really helps to see if it's going to work or if it's not going to work.
Yeah, and sometimes you get married to something that doesn't really quite do it for you. And so then
Just
to
like,
ask someone else's opinion, they'll say, oh, you really need to, I would do this or that. And all of a sudden it all comes together. So yeah, definitely ask for help when you need it. Let's see. Yeah, so I would say as long as your plants look distinct from one another, I like to be able to see each plant. I mean, you see the whole thing as a whole, but I really like to be able to see each plant within that whole composition. So something that obscures another plant doesn't do it for me. I also don't do like when I'm gardening, I'm not a cottage gardener type because I really like things to be compact and I wouldn't even say modern, but I just don't, that's not my style. But if that is if you love something that's really cottagey and kind of out of control, do it, because that's, you know, it's your style. We don't all have to have the same style, and mine definitely is not going to work for everybody, but it's a place to start.
I think it works pretty well, Barbara. So we just have a couple more minutes left, and if everyone's okay, we'll go a little longer because I know that there are a lot of questions. So I know that there was a question about your top shady plants.
Yeah, so for evergreens, I love a good yew, Y-E-W. That Wilma Goldcrest that is right behind Joni there, the limey colored foliage that we looked at, is a great upright for shade. It keeps its nice lime foliage in the shade. It's a really good plant for that. I do love a good heuchera. That's the coral bells, and they come in so many different colors. So that's a really nice, yeah, so that's a great shade, heuchera or heucherella. It's a relative that takes even more shade. There are coleus that are specifically for shade. If you're looking at coleus, read the tag, because some say full sun, some say I don't care, and some say full shade. So take a look. The Kong, K-O-N-G coleus are huge leafed ones for shade, and they're beautiful. And my favorite flower for shade is begonias. Whether they're upright or trailing begonias, I prefer the upright ones myself, just because then unless you're doing a hanging basket, that you want to be able to really see that. But and then there's plenty of trailers for shade as well, but that kind of gets you started.
And then how about sun, Barbara? Top ones for sun.
Everything I showed you. I mean, for annuals, I would say there's a lot of annuals that I never use that I'm sure are perfectly wonderful, but I'm a big relier on the petunias, the geraniums. Right now, early in the season, the pansies, or in winter or fall and winter pansies. But there's diascia, nemesia, dahlias, small dahlias. But for me, the ones that really I feel like have the most bloom are the easiest and are the most forgiving of not being especially kind to them and can take wind, would be geraniums and petunias. And then it's just an old standby, but they keep making prettier ones every year. So even though it kind of seems like an old-fashioned plant, maybe, yeah, they're incredible. And if you live with someplace with a windy balcony, if you're up high in a condo, geraniums are really the way to go. Lots of small scale shrubs are good for the background, like those euonymus, like that cryptomeria. The Wilmas can be in the sun as well. So too many things.
Too many things to go through. I know. Just go to Ravenna Gardens and check them all.
All the plants. All the plants.
Yes, all the plants. So a quick question, because I think this is important. Is a yew poisonous?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, I don't know either. Maybe you should look that up for the person who asked. So I think that would be good.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they're poisonous, and I'm not sure in what regard they are. There is one kind of yew that is the basis for cancer treating drugs, but they're not, like if you were to gorge on berries, probably wouldn't be good for you. And then I did want to address something that I did not say, and a couple of you have asked, do I put anything in the bottom of the pot besides soil? I never do. The pot has to have good holes. I don't put anything but potting soil in there. And the reason for that is because I'm putting kind of shrubby things in that are going to stay in there for long term, so that those evergreen things can stay in those pots for multiple years before they outgrow the pot. So I want to give them as much soil so those roots can go down as much as possible. If you're doing something that you're going to change out seasonally or annually, and you're going to just rip everything out, or it's all annuals that don't have a deep root system, you can sure fill your pot with whatever is an inert material. The bad for the environment, styrofoam works great for that. Either the blocks or the peanuts. If you use the peanuts, put down landscape fabric over the peanuts, or you'll be really sorry when you go to take your plants out because you'll have peanuts everywhere. But those blocks of styrofoam really work great. There's also products that are on the market just for that. But I prefer not to. And unless weight is an issue, then I would do it. But otherwise, I would fill it all the way down with soil. A little soil will dribble out in the very beginning, and then it will stop. So that's my take on that.
Barbara, so many amazing tips today. I am so inspired. I'm going to plant what I have today, and I'm probably going to go over to Ravenna Gardens again today and get some more plants after today.
I recommend
I have some new pots coming, so I'm super excited about that. If you haven't been to Ravenna Gardens, please do so. It's just absolutely a magical place in University Village, and you'll get lost in the beauty and the creativity that is there. So, and say hi to Barbara.
Yeah,
say hi to Barbara or any of the experts there. Thank you, Barbara, so much for joining us today. I am so inspired, and I hope you all are as well.